Hey, we're the Masters of Boredom. Welcome back to our table.
And that's exactly why we are making this video today. We want to show you the table that we built together. Okay, it was mostly CJ.
You helped, Aaron. It's fine. No, really, you did good. Who's a good boy? Who's a good table building assistant?
Me! This magnificent gaming table seats 6, or 10 in a pinch. It basically seats more people than I have chairs for.
It has sliding cup holders for 6 people and is large enough to hold all the materials and pieces from even the heaviest games like Gloomhaven or Heavy Hitters.
This was my dream table. I knew that I wanted to get into board games more seriously. And to do that, I needed something more convenient than my tiny coffee table or my kitchen table. I also knew that purchasing a pre-built one was a little bit more than I could afford, as I spent so much of my money on the games themselves. So I came to CJ, who was the only one of my friends who knew which side of a hammer was the right one.
The first step to a project like this is daydreaming about all the fantastic gadgets and moving parts that you can squeeze into a thing like this. The original design had a screen in the middle of the table with electrical cables running through the table itself so people could plug in their phones or have LAN parties if that was going to be a thing again. We ended up scrapping all but the base necessities for budgetary reasons.
Yeah, I was going through a transitionary period in my life, and due to unexpected expenses, I wasn't exactly as liquid as I would have liked. At the same time, I was dealing with emotional stress, and having a project that I could focus my energies on was vital. Building a game table was perfect. I just didn't have any idea of how to go about it.
We went with some heavy-duty plywood, and we ringed the table with 2x4s, which in retrospect may have been a bit excessive, but at least if we're ever in danger of mortar fire, we can safely hide under the table. Seriously, this thing will stop a tank round.
We were going to use 1-inch hardwood instead to ring the table, but again, finances didn't permit. And I liked the idea of the table being more sturdy, although I would end up paying for that later when trying to move the beast. This thing's heavier than my cloying existential dread.
After sanding down the plywood and filling in some of the holes, the next step was to make the table surface conducive to gaming. After a little research on poker table design, we settled on 1/4-inch thick foam-covered speed cloth.
I didn't want a standard green poker table though. After looking at stains for the wood, I decided on mahogany trim and a burgundy wine color for the speed cloth. And while I was concerned that reddish items might disappear in the color, we have never had an issue. And the 1/4-inch thick foam makes dice bounce nicely and quietly. Playing with dice and cards on this surface is oddly satisfying. Like me in bed, ladies.
Once we had the speed cloth in place and stapled to the plywood, we needed to prevent the table from warping and provide some extra surface area for the stapled speed cloth to adhere to. For that, we used inch-thick wood pieces, which we pre-drilled to prevent splitting, and screwed them to the plywood.
I openly admit to having literally no idea why we did this, but I'm an idiot, so I'll go with the non-idiot. CJ would instruct me to staple the speed cloth to it, and I complied like a worker bee who was possibly drunk.
Next up, we started working on the 2x4s. I had Aaron cut the 2x4s at a 45-degree angle so that they would meet and fall in love and have little 2x4 babies. It's like the giving tree, post-mortem. Most of the images show Aaron working on the table with various tools because one of my goals was to give him an opportunity to work on different tools and different techniques that he will definitely never use again. But nonetheless, I thought the experience was important for a passion project that was his dream.
Didn't work. Forgot everything. Thanks for the table. No, actually, while I don't recall ever being filled with a sense of wonder while cutting wood, drilling holes, and staring blankly into space, I have to admit there is a certain satisfaction in owning a table that I built with my own two hands. And I never would have experienced that if I'd simply bought a table.
So we screwed in the 2x4s around the table, and now it was time to set up the legs. And this was where we ran into our first real problem. Because of the weight of the table, we decided to use 4x4 posts. We used the router table to put a decorative edge on them so they didn't look too bland and blocky. But we needed to affix the legs to the table in a manner that would allow us to remove them in order to transport the table itself. There was just one monumental issue.
For stability's sake, we were going to use bolts, but we'd need to bolt them in from both sides, and there wasn't room. After some experimentation, we came up with a solution we thought we could live with, at least at first. Tragedy strikes when one of the legs winds up bolted in crooked. We scrapped the leg and tried again, but we realized there was just too much play in the bolt holes, and the legs were going to be loose. This was a huge problem that took weeks to fix. In fact, we took a break from the table at that point.
After a couple of glasses of scotch, I suddenly thought, what if I just lopped off a hunk of the leg, screwed that to the table, and then screwed the leg into that? So we used leftover 2x4 pieces to build braces. We then cut the top of the leg off and screwed that part onto those braces. We embedded a screw in the bottom part of the leg, and we created a screw hole in the top. As a result, the legs were now stable and removable.
I gotta admit, I was pretty depressed when this problem came up. I was absolutely no help, and none of my experience was any good at helping out with this, so after a couple of weeks, when CJ excitedly texts me that he'd found an answer, that was when I knew I'd picked the right partner for this job.
The next step was to smooth out the 2x4s, which were still on the rough side, and nothing ruins game night like splinters. We sanded down the 2x4s with a large grit sandpaper to remove the big splinters and the rough spots. Then we filled in the cracks between the 2x4s with wood filler and let it set.
Are you sure? That looks like peanut butter.
Only if you somehow got the jars mixed up.
Yeah, I thought my sandwich tasted funny that day.
Once the filler had set properly, we sanded the excess away. And then we sanded all the edges down using progressively finer grains until that baby was smooth to the touch.
This was when I started becoming impressed with what we were doing. It was actually coming together. Everything about it was just a little more real. This was going to be a sweet-ass gaming table / bomb shelter.
Once all the sanding was done, it was time to stain. I should point out that we had reached the middle of winter at this point, and I had to stain while keeping the garage door closed. This is not something you should ever do. While the table turned out nice, I spent 4 days thinking I was a hummingbird. Every day it was go out in the garage, start a fire, stain, have a headache, go to bed.
Are stain fumes flammable?
Oh yeah, I should be dead like 1,000,000 times over. Just ask my wife.
Okay, do not try any of this at home. Not even this. Talking, sitting at a table, don't do it.
With all the other parts of the table coming together, the last step was making the cup holders. We'd already bought the wood, the cups, and the drawer slides. Once we had the wood pieces stained, we attached all 6 of the cup holders to the table, installed the trim around the playfield, and transported the table with some difficulty to Aaron's apartment.
I cannot overstate my excitement on this day. It had taken months to get to this point, but we got there. There was just one problem. The table was so heavy that 4 of us had a really hard time getting it down the stairs and into what was my game room at the time. But once everything was in place, we set up a few chairs, and it was like magic. The table was the perfect height, and I just felt this rush of gratitude and excitement for the good times that lay ahead. And we've had 2 years of great gaming and laughs since then. But maybe next time I'd spend a little more money for some lighter wood, 'cause damn, girl, you thick!
So, now that we're here, did you ever think we'd be sitting here showing this table to the internet?
It's far from the weirdest thing that I posted on the internet. My grandma still won't talk to me.
Grandma's a kink shamer? That's sad.
Grandpa would have given me a high five.
Seriously, though.
Seriously, when I wanted to build this table, it wasn't for the internet. It was for me. I was going through a turbulent time, and I needed something. And when I did, my friends came through. I can't ask for more than that. Now, let's break out a worker placement game so I can beat your ass good and proper.
Oh, I'm getting a dice game just for that.
Oh, you bastard. Now it's on.
It's on.